Welcome to another episode of Timber Talks, the podcast where we explore the latest trends, innovations, and best practices in the forestry and arboriculture industry. I'm your host, Mindy, and today we have two very special guests joining us, Jeremiah Sandler and Jack Novak, the dynamic duo behind Tree First. Tree First is renowned for its pioneering efforts in the small arboriculture movement. Welcome, Jeremiah and Jack. Let's start by diving into the incredible innovations, advancements in forestry and arboriculture. Jeremiah and Jack, can you share some of the historical evolution in this industry and how Tree First has contributed to this landscape?
You want to take it?
Yeah, thanks for that awesome intro, first and foremost. Pleasure to be here. With regards to like the historical evolution of forestry, or I guess in our case, more specifically arboriculture, the thing that we've seen a lot emphasized in the industry is advancement in equipment and technology for as far as like chippers and like big forestry units, chainsaws, things like that. Think,
we sort of see the historical advancements in arboriculture as sort of taking a wrong turn somewhere, in that there's a big emphasis on productivity and of doing things as quick. And yes, to a degree, we like that things are becoming safer. Don't argue that, but we argue that with the emphasis on productivity, sort of that's being traded for quality tree care. Does that answer that question? I feel like did we get off track there?
No, I think what I see and where I live is the standard. If you had a problem with the tree, it was taken down in the story. But, with prescription techniques, injections, I'm trying to think what else. There's more diagnostic going on than what has been in the past. I mean, heritage trees, stuff like that, they did do prescription approaches and injections because of the value of the trees. But at least in my area, if you have a tree problem, you're going to have somebody come and take it down versus trying to treat it. So from my perspective, that's what I see.
That's exactly what we see too.
Yeah, that's kind of the seemingly the standard for our area too.
Yeah, and we think that approach of being nuanced and thorough and thoughtful, that approach given to heritage trees can also be given to like regular residential people that have big trees, and it's often not. And there's probably a lot of reasons for that happening, but I think the industrialization of the tree care industry is a major contributor of it.
Right. And I think because in some cases it might be cheaper just to take the tree down and plant a new tree, because depending on the species, the tree is relatively inexpensive or can be inexpensive. So from an economic perspective, unless you're just madly in love with a particular type of tree in your yard, in the past at least, it tended to be more economical to take the tree down. But at least in my area and some of the other things I do, I'm seeing a change in the view of urban trees. And not only do they bring beauty, but they also bring economic value to, whether you're talking about a landscaping or a tree city or something along that line. So there's an incentive to try to keep a tree alive versus taking it down and just replanting. So
I think there is an argument to be made that, like, economically, sure, the one-time payment of having to remove a tree might seem, and then following that with the replanting, might seem like the way to go. But ecologically, it's apples to oranges. A brand new planting does not serve the ecology of the environment nearly as well as like a large, mature, even veteran tree. So I think just kind of reframing the way we view trees, not as being like this commodity, oh, I can just remove and replant and I'm doing my part. I hope that's
That was concise.
Yeah.
You got
Okay.
it.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
good. Well said.
Well, we're learning more. I mean, like in Japan, where we buy a gym membership, they buy a forest membership because we've learned to strengthen
If
our
of course,
immune
yeah.
system. We, walk among the trees and they drop bacteria on us that helps us become stronger as far as our immune system. So, but old habits die hard. My area, if you have a problem, they take the tree down,
Yeah.
and in more environmentally concerned areas, the mature trees are a larger carbon sink than a sapling or and so we are kind of circling back around and seeing kind of we really need to keep the big trees to reduce as part of our plan to reduce carbon production. So can you tell us about some key historical advancements in forestry and how they have shaped modern practices? So we've kind of touched on that, but just as an example, do you see some differences from like 5 years ago, what arboriculturalists were using, like in sod development technology? Do you see a big change happening just with saws as an example?
Yeah, with the advent of these battery powered saws, I do
Yeah.
like that. I know that on a user basis, it's nice that it's quiet. I'm not getting exposed to all these fumes. I know that on the other
The neighbors appreciate it
the
too. Yeah.
neighbors are
Yeah.
cool with it. So I do
Mhm.
like that. And I know that
There are.
there's a few larger battery powered saws now. But on the other side of that, I know that there's um some ethical dilemmas with lithium mining, which is a major ingredient in these batteries. So like I don't want to go down that whole rabbit
Right.
hole, but
Hmm.
just like everything, there's pros and cons. But I do like that the e-saws, strictly speaking on the user basis, I do like the e-saws a lot more than the gas powered saws.
Well, I was raised on a farm, so I mean I've taken trees down, I've split wood, and I'm only 5'1", so I'm not a huge person, but I did a product review for uh, a little bitty saw at battery operated. I have to say I really liked it. It's not really conducive to farm life, but it's a really nice, simple to use saw. It doesn't have a big kick to it. Battery operated, 2-hour battery life. So for which I really don't want to say it this way, but for women, it seemed like technology was kind of catching up and producing products that were easy for women to use who, just wanted to take saplings down, or, this saw would only handle some small trees. Um, but I thought that was kind of interesting that the technology, at least in my mind, was kind of steering into that direction. My only negative with that saw is I have really small hands, so it was a 2-button system, and wearing my
Mhm.
safety gear, I couldn't. I had to take a glove off to try to. So it was still kind of styled for a man's hand, but it's very lightweight and um I was like, yeah, 5 years ago, women didn't have technology like that. We had to use the big saws. So that's how I
Yeah.
kind of see it's identifying that men and women are going into that field, whether you're a DIYer at home or you're trying to do it as a profession. So that's kind of how I see the change. I've also I don't have it in my area, but I never realized that they were using cranes. I've seen cranes used to
Oh,
replant like really large trees.
That's
Um,
cool.
yeah.
but I've never seen in my area cranes being used as far as to remove material and stuff. So I think that's kind of cool. So
Yeah,
you
it's a
know,
very popular method
Yeah.
for around here with how large the trees are and usually in inconvenient places to get to. Usually a crane does make
Yeah.
life a lot easier.
And sort of on that, what we touched on a few points ago about like just historical developments, I think like the accessibility of these cranes and making removal easier is good for like worker safety, but it also opens the doors for like the removals to be an easier option for people.
mhm.
And that I think is a slippery slope. I'm sure we could talk about that,
Yeah.
all day. But
Oh,
yeah, I
oh
think
yeah,
making removals easier is a double-edged sword.
right. And I've just through interviews and just some things I've observed how a lot of agricultural technology is seeping into arboriculture because we have prescription farming and
Hmm.
there's prescribed methods, injections and stuff like that for trees. Do you all use drones at all?
No.
No,
Yeah.
we've considered it in some of our risk analysis work just to get a more zoomed out image
Hmm.
of the tree. But we're not doing any like big surveys or anything like that. We're more on like the individual
Like
residential
sector. Yeah.
sector. Yeah. So I think the drones definitely have a use in certain applications in arboriculture and in forestry too, but not, we would get it probably just for cool photos,
Yeah.
but not for any like productive means.
Well, I have 3 drones for some other projects I do, and they are cool. Um, yeah, I'll have to say they're really cool. So when I saw the drone technology coming out, I had done a business competition for a wearable drone for farmers, small farmers. But I told my husband I'm going to have a drone, and said once you get one, you've got to get more. So I like that technology, but again, you have to use it responsibly, and it has to be used for the right reasons. So, um, how has Tree First incorporated new technologies and methods into the operations to stay ahead in the industry? So, we've kind of touched on drones. We've touched on chainsaws that are utilized with batteries. Is there anything else? Are you all using like AI or anything like that to try to stay ahead of the curve?
I mean, I think we implement sonic tomography in our
Ah,
practice pretty
mm-hmm,
regularly.
mm-hmm,
And while that's not really a new technology, I mean, we're on the third
Mhm.
iteration of the PECAS. That's the
Yeah.
one we use right now. It's not something that we see very many arboriculture practices like offer as being a service. So we're trying to implement that, these advanced forms of risk assessment, so people and us can have a better understanding of what's going on with the trees.
Mhm. And I think in another way, in the opposite direction, I think we're sort of, I don't want to say we're going backwards, but I think we're going more sideways than with the trends.
Yeah,
The trends being like bigger chipper, bigger truck, bigger everything.
we operate out of a van with the small chipper and
Yeah.
have an overall like really low footprint.
Yeah, and
And
that allows us to like not really have to keep pace with new tech, and instead sort of allows us to do more hardcore arboriculture, which I think is how we stay ahead of any trends, really.
okay. So could you
we
explain?
kind of like separated, like made a delineation between what tree work is and what arboriculture is.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of the industry trends that we're seeing right now, and like the technology and equipment being developed is a little more catered to tree work as opposed to arboriculture.
Mhm. Could you explain the sonic? I mean, I understand it, but not everyone is going to understand what you're talking about as far as using sonic technology on trees. Could you give a brief explanation about that?
So sonic tomography is a tool used in advanced risk analysis of trees. This there's multiple different sonic tomography tools. There's not just one, but in essence, what these machines do, there's also electronic tomography as well, but these tools function in more or less the same way. You set up, as an example, let's say you want to have a better understanding of the decay in the base of a tree, and this client doesn't want to jump straight to removal and they want to be thorough. One of the tools at our disposal is or rather, the tool works that you set up a bunch of sensors around a single horizontal plane of whatever plane you're looking at. And these sensors will then in turn produce a sound, and each sensor sort of picks up what the other sensors are telling it. And through some crazy math, it produces then an image that is called a sonogram. And the sonogram is sort of like a cross section scan of whatever plane that you're looking at. Um, you can do combinations of multiple planes, and then the software can also sort of stitch them together and how it thinks a three-dimensional space looks. And with that information, you can then take it to a certain software that can help quantify safety factors and strength loss of that stem, and also can help give you prescriptions on how to reduce the safety factor of that area.
Increase the safety factor.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Important.
increase. Yeah.
You want to increase it. And it's important to say too that these tools aren't just like magic. It's not like you do a scan and it tells you, yep, it's good, or no, it's not.
It involves some interpretation.
Yeah, and you still have to make a judgment call. And similarly, when you use the data you collect in the software isn't gospel either. It still requires nuance and thoughtfulness when using these tools. But really, at the end of the day, these are tools to just gather more information to make better decisions about trees.
And also, like the function, like so sound will travel. I think you kind of miss like how the image is generated. So like healthy wood or sound wood is going to have sound waves travel through it differently versus like decayed or like transitionally decayed wood. So from the speed at which sound travels, that's how the image gets generated, from quote unquote healthy wood to decayed wood or like transitional
if it would be
wood.
helpful too, we can send you some photos of some of our scans so that the audience can see like what those might actually look like.
Okay, that'd be great to just put that so people can see it. So you actually are utilizing a technology that's been used for years in the medical field, but you're using it with trees.
Yeah, a lot of people compare it to like ultrasounds.
Yeah, right.
And that's kind of when we're sort of talking with clients, that's sort of the analogy we use.
Yeah, and like, often that kind of stuff is reserved for really high profile trees, but what we're trying to do is make it just more accessible to lay people who want to take care of their trees.
Right. So have you all ever, I know augmented reality is a big thing. Have you ever taken the information, the scan of the tree, and put it in augmented reality to explain about the damage to
That would be cool.
Yeah.
No, we haven't done that.
Okay.
But that would be super cool.
Okay. All right. I saw a show last night on that, so different topic, but it just came to mind. Could you share a specific example of an innovative project that Tree First has been involved in recently?
Well, we just got back from Spoken Loam, which was an awesome conference out in Alberta, Canada. It was the first one that Emmy had put on, and it was an awesome success. So
that conference was sort of in line with this whole small arb movement, away from big production stuff and more towards like conscientious tree care.
Yeah.
I guess so we were speakers at that conference, but I guess we didn't really have a hand in like making the conference itself. We were just participants of it.
But sort of in that same vein, I think our most like passionate project that we're on is actually like the development of our own like business model, what we're calling the practitioner model, and in trying to develop a way where passionate arborists can have a practice that is both purposeful and also profitable without exploiting trees to make money.
Right. Well, we've had, there's been several industries that have had the slow movement. You've had, slow cooking instead of, 20-minute meal, cooking more from scratch. So it sounds to me like you guys are kind of moving into that slow movement, but with arboriculture. So and treating it as a patient doctor relationship with the trees versus just take this tree down so we can move on to something else. So
it's funny, that's the exact analogy that we often use when we're explaining this kind of thing.
Yeah, our clients are the trees.
Yeah.
Right. So Very
Yeah,
interesting.
and we could, we could expand on that a whole bunch, but I will just plug an article. We do have an article more specifically about that subject on our website if anyone wants to check that out.
Okay, all right. Now looking ahead, what do you see as the future of forestry and arboriculture? Do you see this more slow, careful, precision type of technique taking on like wildfire, or do you see maybe a divide between, quick and easy arborists that just want to take the trees down versus the doctor patient
Hmm.
physician type of, or do you see maybe kind of a combined approach for the future?
So, I mean, anecdotally, we've spoken to a lot of other arborists, all across the country, just in private, about sort of this feeling of like dissatisfaction with their job, and just feeling like they have a lack of purpose, and they feel like they're doing something wrong to trees. And so, you know, I think that there is this movement beginning, where the small arb approach is sort of on the horizon. It's still, I think, in like the very
Hmm.
infant stages. But I think from that movement getting more traction, I think we will start to see a divide from production tree work to like more thoughtful and purposeful arboriculture. And I think this isn't just a bash production work.
The place for it.
There is a place for it, when you're working in like the municipal sector, and you're managing a lot of trees. um, there is, yeah, there is a place for it. But um, I think this division of tree work and arboriculture is something that we kind of anticipate being, you know, like being on the forefront.
Yeah, and I'd like to be part of that.
Yeah.
Well, this idea of the more of a pruning approach versus taking down, that's been happening for years in fruit orchards. We prune them to increase production, because mature fruit trees are pretty expensive. So we want to try to preserve them as long as we possibly can. But your all's idea, do you all know the story about Johnny Appleseed?
I
M-
That
mean, not
maybe
at
not
a
as,
yeah, at
yeah.
a surface
Okay,
level.
well,
Yeah.
Yeah.
Johnny Appleseed was from the 1800s. I taught a class, a gardening class, and I had a kind of a weird way of presenting the information. But Johnny Appleseed was a real person, and he went around North America passing out fruit trees. And during this time, people were grafting, and Johnny Appleseed followed a certain religion that didn't believe in that because they felt the grafting process caused pain to the trees. So all the apple trees he distributed, he started from apple seeds, which when you mentioned about the pain and that type of thing. So being gentle and kind to the trees has, maybe went further back than now, and it's just recircling. Because I didn't know that about Johnny Appleseed. I was using him as an example to teach a point, and I was like, that's kind of interesting. you
Yeah, I've
know?
never explored that character. I've known that he was a real
Person.
Mhm.
Yeah.
person, but I never really explored the character.
Yeah, and the communication system of the roots of trees, how they protect each other, and they send signals out with one of their own is being attacked for beneficial insects to come and try to help. And so, with science is catching up with this concept of only remove when you absolutely have to, and treat them more of a patient than
Yeah, and
something that's
there's ways to reduce risk without reducing it to the ground.
right.
And there's so many treatments and there's so many ways that you can get data about trees that can
Mhm,
inform what to do with them, that it's
mhm.
there's so much more to be explored with the caretaking of trees that it is an actual shame that the two options are given to people are just like prune it or kill it, and that's it.
Right.
Yeah, and I think when clients are given these more in-depth ways of like analysis,
Just even thinking
yeah,
about it.
just even thinking about it, they're really receptive to it, but they've only been exposed to a handful of ideas, which is usually pruning, removal, or nothing.
Yeah.
So, it's we have more tools in our toolkit for dealing with trees. And something that we say a lot is like, when you're approaching, the way we approach is like, we have to think like a tree, not like a tree guy. Tree guys love making cuts and like removing trees and then posting it on the internet for everyone to watch. But trees are really into like having good soil and being watered, and
They're plants.
they're living organisms. So, I think that sort of mindset is hopefully something that we
More of.
more of, going on in the future.
Okay. So if an arborist was intrigued about your all's approach to tree maintenance, what would be some suggestions for professionals who wanted to pursue this healthier approach versus just taking down? What would be some suggestions you would have?
Things first is that, gosh, I could talk forever about this. First things first is that you have to care. And of course, you have to care about your safety. Once you're after that point, you have to be able to study trees as living organisms and also know how to differentiate. Just because you know how to make a cut, you then have to graduate to asking, when should I make that cut? Do I actually have to make that cut? Um, there's, I think there's a lack of emphasis on in tree care like education. I think there's a lack of emphasis on tree bio, and there's a lack of emphasis on like the ecological roles that trees play.
Mm-hmm.
That the best way I could say that is to zoom out more as someone who's like considering practicing in a more holistic way, and moving away from this like amenity viewpoint of trees as just being like beautiful statues and more towards like this is a living thing, serves multiple roles, and one of which is that like literally makes the environment better and makes the environment kind of what it is. And without those things, we don't know how to take care of those things. I don't think I don't think you're an arborist until you know how to take care of trees.
Yeah, and there are credentials that you can get, but the one thing that we find that credentials don't teach is perspective. And this perspective of being a caretaker of trees is something that we think every arborist should have. And just because you're talking to a certified arborist doesn't necessarily mean they care about trees. They just were able to pass a test. So
Right, right.
it credential hunting and credential chasing is a huge thing in our industry. And
It might not be the best place to spend your efforts. I think
yeah,
it's better to spend your efforts in like learning how trees work and how to improve tree vitality, and also uh, to separate tree risk from tree stress. Those are two different domains of arboriculture that one should explore deeply and understand that these are not the same thing. Generally speaking, for example, we're pruning for stress. Or I'm sorry, we're pruning for risk. And if we want to alleviate some stress, we're probably going to address the soil.
Mm-hmm.
We're generally not pruning for tree health.
yeah.
Right,
That was long and tangential. Sorry.
So, what you would suggest would be for arborists who are considering going into more of a holistic approach to educate themselves.
Yeah.
And I know that's a generic answer, but like
Yeah.
you have to. You absolutely have to.
Okay. Well, it's really that way in any industry. You should, educate yourself on different aspects and kind of test the waters occasionally to see if there's a better way of doing, whatever the position, whatever the job is. Um, so how do you see technology transforming the industry in the next 5 to 10 years? And I'm going to kind of narrow this down, as far as your all's holistic approach. How do you see technology changing how you holistically take care of trees in the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, I mean, like a lot of like we do a lot of testing, whether it's, making use of soil labs. We have a root testing
Mhm.
kit that we're just beginning to implement and sort of work through. I think really like testing by other means than with a chainsaw. So, I think that is that's something that we're going to see a lot more of.
That's what I'd like
That's
to
what I'd
see
like
more
to
of.
see. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'd also like to see more field testing applications.
Yeah.
If I didn't always have to send things to a lab, because sometimes I don't need super precise results.
Mhm.
Sometimes I just need like kind of precise results. So if there was like a boom in like field testing technology, that would be sweet. I'd be all over that.
Okay. All right. Well, so everything that you tell, like soil tests and stuff like that, you currently have to send out.
Yeah.
Largely, yeah. We can do some basic pH testing. And we can also do like basic texture analysis ourselves. But when it comes to chemical analysis, like yeah, we can't do anything meaningful out in the field.
All right. So you're talking about MPK.
Yeah, or micros or like in this area, calcium saturation is something that we think about a lot in soils. So yeah, things like that. Like I just can't like find those things out in a quick way.
Right. Right. Do you all offer any, like, just for the general public? Do you all offer any type of classes that deal with your holistic approach? Because as a matter of fact, I have a neighbor that is handicapped, and you know, anyway, he hired a tree service, a nursery. It was a nursery to plant these two trees, which they did wrong, and he had family plant a shrubbery, which was done wrong. So just be neighborly. I went in and redid his entire landscape because from
Wow.
my background, if you do it correctly from the very beginning, it reduces problems down the road. And we have like crazy amounts of clay where I live. And sorry about that. So we have to deglaze the whole, if we're planting a tree, a shrub, because if we don't, we're going to lose that tree in probably 5 to 10 years. So do
Yeah.
you all provide any holistic educational classes for the public?
We just gave our very first international presentation last weekend.
Oh.
And it was at that conference in Edmonton that we mentioned. I think that's something that's on our horizon.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of people, clients, tell me and Jack that like, do you guys teach anywhere, or tell us that we should. It's a tricky thing, I think, to balance running the practice and
Mhm.
um, developing like a curriculum.
Right.
Very interested in it. But currently it's not something that we do. I guess it's sort of a class when you hire us and you have a consultation with us. It's sort
Yeah.
of like a class. But that's
One-on-one
not like
class. One-on-one
right,
class. Yeah.
right. But it's not like zoomed out big picture. It's more like
Mhm.
that specific case that we're talking about.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
We are exploring it. I mean,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, we are.
We actually have some really cool ideas that
Yeah.
I don't want to spoil on accident, but yes, we think that that's in our future.
Okay. All right. Well, I just know, like, again, I keep going back where I am in Indiana.
Oh,
There's a
mine's
lot of
very close, I guess.
misinformation about tree care, but it starts from the very beginning. I used to have these beautiful Colorado blues, and when I bought them many years ago, they were 5 foot in height, and they were just going to town. And I needed a new roof, and I had noticed when I was mowing the grass, there was this black, like gravelly substance behind one of my Colorado blues, and I thought it was the gravel coming from the roof. It wasn't. My neighbor, not the neighbor I have now, but the neighbor prior, had changed the oil in his vehicle and had poured motor oil. And by this time, my
Wow.
Colorado blues were like 20 feet in height. And needless to say, I wasn't happy. So I went
Wow.
over and confronted the man, and he informed me that motor oil didn't kill trees. It's like,
I would love to ask,
Yeah.
like, how do you know that?
Yeah.
you know, it took my tree down, but I was,
Oh, that
you
sucks.
know, yeah, I was like, we really need some education here.
Yeah, and I mean Jeremiah does a lot of article writing, and all of those, articles are on our website. Yeah, just open to the
Yeah.
public.
Mhm.
So I think in an indirect way,
Mhm.
we do provide some educational material for people that want to learn more.
And in that too, it isn't just tree science stuff.
Yeah.
It's also like I talk a lot about just like ethics in
Mhm.
arboriculture and like perspective and yeah, and to be honest, I think we are having an influence in that way too, because we get a lot of people responding to those articles in a positive way.
Mhm.
And also too, those articles, some of them are in the Tree Care Industry Association magazine. Some of them are, a small percentage of them are.
All right. So wrapping this up, um, what is some practical advice and best practices for the listeners when it comes to just basic tree care that you would give? Like your top three.
Yeah.
Water. Okay.
Yeah, water
Water
your trees.
trees.
Yeah, and as an arborist, it's just important to exercise this idea of like critical thinking. Don't be so quick to jump to conclusions. I get a lot of positive response from clients when I say, you know what, like I got an idea of what's going on, but I got to go home and think about this. And they really appreciate transparency and like this sense of like, hey, I'm thinking about this. I'm not going to jump to any conclusions.
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
I think it's made me a better arborist,
yeah.
just practicing the art of thinking.
Thinking
you
about
know,
arboriculture.
yeah,
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 yeah. And to like client, I think people often think that when you're talking with a client that you should have all of the answers, and that's totally not our experience. What they expect you to do is think about it. And when they see that, like you're sort of already winning their trust without even producing an answer.
yeah.
Right. Right. So are the on average, are the customers wanting to learn, or are they more likely just do your job and just
So
leave me alone type of approach?
with the branding that we have online and specifically on our website,
Mhm.
the clients have sort of like self-selected um
Mm.
in that the they are choosing us for a very specific reason. And so we found that by and large, like they want to learn or they care. We have
Mhm.
very few times where people tell us, hey, shut up and just do it.
Yeah.
Often we're having conversation with these people.
Okay. All right. So they are on purpose selecting your holistic approach versus just
Yeah, yeah. We
finding
don't use
someone.
any of like the basic like internet SEO strategies. Like our branding is very much like I think I even say on the website, if you're looking for like thoughtful tree care, we're looking for clients like you.
Hmm.
It's very it's black and white.
Right. Right. Well, thank you so much, Jeremiah and Jack, for sharing your insights and experiences with us today. It's been a fascinating discussion. To our listeners, make sure to check out Tree First at treefirst.org for more information about their innovative work in forestry and arboriculture. Don't forget to subscribe to Timber Talks for more episodes with industry leaders and experts. Until next time, I'm Mindy, and this has been Timber Talks. So, do you have any questions for me?
I do. You
Okay.
you have a background in agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
And early on in our conversation, you touched on um how there's agricultural practices that are for lack of a better word, like leaking into
Mm-hmm.
arboriculture. One
Right.
of those that I've always thought was um sorry if you can hear the neighbor weed
Yeah.
whacking
You
near
know
us. Is
what?
that
You know what? I'm perfectly fine with that. To be
okay?
completely honest with you, I've got crazy people all around me, so that doesn't bother me.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
Um,
You know.
so so what I've always thought about looking at like tree fertilizer analysis, whether there's just super high numbers. I understand that these plants are generally speaking large plants, but I wondered that I think a lot of agricultural fertilization is those numbers are often high because these plants are being grown for production purposes. They have an
Mhm.
explicit goal with these
Mhm.
plants. But with trees, I've often found that when I look at how other people are fertilizing them, I'm
Mhm.
like, dude, why are we putting down so much of these things? And I've often wondered, has that practice come from agriculture?
I would say so. You know, I'm one of those people. I don't water unless I test. You know, I don't. I have a rain gauge. I'm not extremely anal about what the rain gauge says. But as far as fertilization, yes, because the farm prices have been so crazy that farmers will just throw fertilizer on a crop hoping to increase the yield, whether it actually does that or not. And farmers are very familiar with NPK, but unfortunately, you've got me on a soapbox here. So um, extension agents that farmers go to for advice, their income comes from Macento because Macento is giving money to land grant colleges. So of course they're going to encourage over fertilization. I've had a couple of private clients that had some really unique products that they and different types of fertilization and stuff, and they couldn't get anybody at a land grant college to work with them. The reason is it's not a Macento product, so they're not going to. So yes, it's a carryover because the research that's being done as far as from the academic perspective is being done at land grant colleges that get money from Macento, which is a really large fertilizer producer. So it's, yes, it's kind of all woven in together. And you know, it's not the best practice. I don't follow that, but I'm not really, I'm not connected to a university, so I can recommend whatever. And I'm more of an organic gardener, more holistic, want to do it right the first time. And I do know motor oil takes trees down. So,
Yeah, yeah. Well, thank you for that. Because we often like we get clients that'll ask us about fertilization and stuff, and we always say like without a soil analysis, like we're not or unless you're seeing like an explicit, obvious nutrient deficiency,
like iron or
like I'm not gonna put stuff down unless I know what's going on.
well, the problem is even the soil test recommendations are based on an acre.
Right. You always have to convert to square footage and
And then by the time you do that, the recommendation really doesn't make much sense. So I'm very much an advocate of using organic substances. I'm very much an advocate of going back to the old way of using like manures versus the chemical fertilizers that
we use biochar a lot. So another question then, a more, if I can ask you a more like specific question.
Sure, go ahead.
We have a lot of, in this area, river birch that are chlorotic. Generally speaking, we have alkaline soils here that are really high in calcium saturation. But we've thought like with the nutrient levels being adequate in both leaf tissue and in soil analyses, we've thought like, well, perhaps we should try to adjust the pH. But of all the literature I've read and in school, I've always been told or read that changing soil pH is super difficult without constant input. Like, do you think something like that is even worth trying?
No, I don't. I mean, sometimes you just have to go with what you have and just hope for the best. So no, I wouldn't try to change the pH because it's going to be a never ending battle because that soil has a natural pH that's been created by all the elements that, you know, sort of like making a cake. And if you're using a chocolate cake mix and you want to change it and you add raspberries to it, it's still going to be a chocolate cake. You're just going to be this constant, you know, reapplication. So I wouldn't try to fool around with the pH because it's going to cause a cascade of problems. Once you start that, then it's going to cause another problem. It's going to cause another problem. And, you know, it's very easy to go when you're fooling with the pH. It's very easy to go from one extreme to the other very quickly. And then it's hard to get back, you know, so I would just leave the pH alone.
Okay. Yeah, because this year more than ever, we're seeing like, you know, we have chlorosis here and there on like red maple or pin oak or whatever, but we're seeing it a lot of river birch this year, and a lot of people are asking about it. And each time I'm looking into them, keep coming back as like pHs of like 7.5, 7.4, and like nutrient levels seem adequate. I'm like, I think this is it.
It's kind of like what Ben goes.
Yeah. Like how do you answer? And you know, this of course I don't know if this is true or not, but the client would say, "Well, it just started looking this way." But these are like mature sized river birch that are 40, 50 feet tall.
Mhm.
Um, so some part of me wonders, like, could they have even gotten to this size if they were chlorotic their entire lifespan? Or is their observation correct in that it's suddenly changed?
Right.
Yeah, that's something I wonder about.
And the other thing is, our climate's changing. We've had, well, they
Mm,
refer to them as walking trees, where trees are moving up to
yeah.
elevations. And it could just be a response to the climate change, and there's nothing you can do about
Yeah,
about
Yeah.
that. I
a good
wish we
point.
could,
Yeah.
but we can't. I mean, we're having temperatures in southern Indiana 90 plus, and we normally don't have that till August.
Yeah, same here.
So,
Yeah,
you
and
know,
early
Yeah,
June.
yeah, that's a good point. I mean, weather and climate is, I mean, aside from water, that is the next,
Major
yeah,
variable.
major variable in addressing
Yeah.
plant health. And
and in
yeah, we are seeing.
this global change, some of the invasive species are kind of falling by the wayside, but others are just going crazy. Kudzu in my area is crazy. I know you can make whiskey out of kudzu, but
That's a lot of
I think,
whiskey.
Yeah,
yes, that's a lot of whiskey. I think that would be a great, you know, value added product for Aggies. But, um,
Mhm.
we're getting some really weird pests, and some invasive species are just going crazy. And we've got some plant material, whether it's flowers or bushes or native plant material, that's just suffering terribly from this global change. So I wouldn't fool with the
that's such a
pH.
good point.
Yeah.
you know
Yeah,
Yeah, I put that on my notes. I put a star next to the word climate. Yeah, I
yeah,
think you nailed it.
that is such a good point. Because yeah, it can be frustrating when we're going through all of the
Yeah, I'm looking through the literature. I
yeah.
can't find anything that's helping me.
It's like, oh yeah, what about like the weather?
Right. And, we had a lot of rain earlier in the year. And I have some funds that put out, they're country folk. They plant 3 rows of potatoes. I wouldn't do that. I'll just go to the store and buy potatoes. I'll plant something else in those 375-foot rows than potatoes. But we had all this rain, and I'm gonna say they lost probably 3/4 of what they planted. And we had rain, like monsoon rain, really, really early in our season. And that we normally have like what I call rainy season that lasts like 2 weeks, and then it dries up. But this went for like 6 weeks.
Wow.
And we have clay soil. So when it stopped, it was still wet. So I think there's a lot of changes. I mean, I have crazy Japanese honeysuckle. It is literally, it took part of my privacy fence down. It's crazy. And when you have that invasive species, it changes the soil chemistry. So
Hmm.
does fireball bush. And you can't grow anything because it changes the soil chemistry. Nothing will grow once you take that out except Japanese honeysuckle or fireball bush. So, I mean, there's just so many aspects that
With
when we deal with the natural environment that we haven't really had to deal with before. And some things we can control, and some things we just can't. We just got to go with it.
with your experience in agriculture and like how plants affect the surrounding soil, what do you know of, like, what impacts grass has to like overall soil pH, if
Like turf
any?
grass.
Yeah, like turf grass.
Like turf grass. Well,
Yeah.
if you're talking about like a golf course, one of the big things, and it just literally drives me crazy, the lawn care companies,
Oh, I love this. I love this again.
they just drench people's yards with high nitrogen fertilizer, whether you need it
Uh-huh.
or not,
Yeah.
because it causes grass to green up. I mean, that's what nitrogen does. It feeds the foliage essentially. So you get that beautiful green grass, and they also spray paint your grass too. But that's another story. But um, as far as if it's like my yard, I don't fertilize. I just let nature do its thing. So it really doesn't have an effect as far as NPK. Um,
Okay.
But if you live in an urban environment and
Like,
you have a tree, you have a lawn service come in and they fertilize the ground, and you're going to have a high nitrogen problem, which is going to affect everything because
mhm.
we don't have little walls around our root systems of our trees and stuff that we can isolate that nitrogen, and they're not always the most careful of spreading that fertilizer. So high nitrogen is a big problem, but they have to use it to get that instant greening
Mhm.
of the grass. So
To your knowledge, does it affect like pH levels at all?
I'm not aware of it affecting pH levels. I just know if you live in a or drive past like a subdivision that has many rich people that are paying for lawn care, if you look in like the drainage ditches or creeks and stuff, you'll see the graining of those surfaces where the runoff from the nitrogen is causing
Mhm.
water pollution. But as far as the pH, I'm not aware of really any change in that. I don't think there's many studies being done, if any, on the high nitrogen fertilizer used in the turf industry, because if there was, they wouldn't be using all this high nitrogen fertilizer because the EPA
Yeah.
be coming down on them. So, but
Well, we
yeah.
got to do some studies then.
Yeah.
Well, it's crazy though that too, because the like nitrification of soils and of like waterways, like that's a known thing. But I think ag gets a lot of that blame. How much of that blame do you think should actually come down to like urban fertilizing practices, like in lawns?
I think a lot. My neighbor next door to me, he's handicapped, but he's got a fertilizer spreader. And, just last weekend, he wants me to prune the shrubbery, which the man has one hand. I'm fine with that. I'll help him out. But, his first inkling was this boxwood's not looking the best. And he had two approaches. I'm going to put fertilizer spikes around it, or I'm just going to pull it out of the ground and it's only $14 and I'm just going to replace it. And I was like, no, don't do either one of those, but he also um, didn't use landscape cloths. And he also, the previous owner had lined her landscaping with black plastic bags and couldn't figure out why nothing would grow. But yeah, yeah. Um,
Classic.
yeah. So I don't even remember the question now. Oh, about ag. So I think yes, ag's gone down for a lot of the pollution issues from fertilization, but lawn care services, I mean, I have this philosophy. If I see somebody that is doing something outside and they've got a hazmat suit on, I don't want it near me. And these people suit up. They've got the gloves, they've got the boots, they've got,
Hmm.
and that tells me that one, it's not healthy for the environment. And two, they're probably not trained. And three, they're probably doing something they shouldn't be doing. So, but they're never going to make the lawn care companies responsible as with ag, because ag is actually a bigger abuser of the fertilizer situation, as an example.
Well, and I think it's also tricky because I'm not, I'm just playing devil's advocate. Um, with ag, these crops are creating something of value,
Mm-hmm.
whether it's potatoes or corn, or like
Mm-hmm.
there is some input back into society from their efforts, but the same can't really be said for like lawn care services, aside from like beautifications from a beauty standard that's like 200 years outdated.
Right. Well,
So yeah, so
actually,
like the turf industry has nothing,
No legs to
there's no
stand on.
legs to
Yeah.
stand on.
our concept of lawn came from France, from Versailles Palace. So it's been a long. I'm an international author on gardening books, so I used to teach ag too. So but anyway, that yes, you're absolutely right. But it's a status symbol. That's why in North
Yeah.
America, the
Yeah.
13 colonies, they knew if they kept the field away from the door, it reduced the number of rodents that would come in the house. But
Mm.
then you had aristocrats in France that had these finely tuned gardens and these manicured lawns, and if you want to show you have status, you're going to do what the aristocrats do. So
Yeah.
we have lawns now, and the amount of pollution that's produced by lawnmowers and the amount of pollution produced by pesticide, herbicide, fertilization just for lawns is crazy. But it
Agreed.
goes right back to the status thing. In my opinion, it goes right back to the status thing.
No,
So
yeah, I think you're exactly right.
Yeah.
And it's a difficult thing to get out of
It's so
culture's
ingrained.
head.
Yeah.
Yeah.
well, like I had every May, I do no mow May on the farm. And so I don't do the entire no mow May because my dad, I seem to, I don't, it's another topic, but my dad's neighbor is an urbanite. And I had my drone out one time and he came over and proceeded to argue with me about it. And the argument really, what it had to do with essentially was I was a female out using a drone and he didn't like that because he didn't say anything to my husband when he took the drone up. But I only do half of the farm for no mow May for the bees because the bees are coming out looking for food and stuff. And in this year I did no mow May in my backyard and I have a privacy fence. And so I needed gas because I have a push mower. So I mow my urban yard with a push mower and I hadn't got gas yet. Well, a neighbor of mine called City Hall. Anyway, the city came. I call them love notes. Gave me a love note on my door, telling me my grass was too tall. And I go through this not every year, but periodically. I've probably been down this road probably 8 times. And my whole stance is, well, how do you know my grass is in violation? We have this magical number of 8 inches. I don't know where the heck that came from. But this concept that your lawn has to look this certain way, and they try to cite me for having a bull thistle in my landscaping. And I had to laugh about that because when I was at Purdue, I came in second in the legal weed competition, which I don't tell a lot of people that, but it was a big thing for Purdue. And so I do know my weeds. And I have actually taken a big yardstick and stuck it in my ground and measured my lawn and went by, I'm not in violation. You eyeball it and it's your personal opinion and you don't like it and I don't care, but it's not against the law. So again, I think it goes right back to this whole status thing. Your grass has to look the certain way. The way I do my grass, it's a natural weed controller. The way they want me to do my grass is not, which goes against how I function. So I think to swing this back around for the turf industry to be partially responsible for the fertilizer problems, I think this entire concept, like you all are doing, a holistic approach to lawn care needs to start. And it's not a crime if your grass is over 8 inches. It's just the way it is. So
yeah, and like one way that, like, we've said this before in other contexts, but it's more important to consider like crimes against nature as being like more meaningful set of laws to abide by. It's not a crime against nature to have grass longer than 8 inches.
Yeah, I actually asked, well, who made that decision? And what's her credentials?
And based on what?
Yeah, it's your opinion. And you can't win when you're dealing with a city that, it's just a no-win type of situation. But, just like the motor oil with my tree, nobody cared about that. I cared about it. I knew it was going to cost me economically. I knew the economic value of my tree, but nobody cared, trying to change that mindset. And as a matter of fact, this is kind of a sidebar. I had a neighbor. I know I'm being sarcastic when I say this. I know the neighbor didn't do it. It was a group of garden fairies that went down and got a table that he had put out for the trash or someone to pick up to reuse. And they carried it all the way down to my house and put it in my yard. They were so nice doing that. So I took pictures of it. I was about to send a nasty social media post about it. And my husband came home and I said, that's not our table. And I know exactly where the garden fairies got it. So my husband was leaving and he helped the garden fairies take that table back and give it back to the neighbor. But just the simple respect of when you live in an urban environment, and whether it's motor oil behind someone's tree, dumping your trash in somebody else's yard, being respectful that, they may have a different viewpoint of how their yard looks. You know, it's this cookie cutter approach, and if it doesn't fit that cookie cutter, too bad type of thing. So I mean, I've been in this area way too long, and I have to say that's the first time I've ever had the garden fairies do that. I've had some garden fairies do some weird stuff, but I was livid. I mean, I was like, I don't know where you came from or how you were raised, but you know, you need to go back to school on how to properly act in a society, because your behavior just really peeves me off. And so we kind of got off topic on that, but I don't see the turf industry taking responsibility for the fertilizer issue we have. Ag will carry that load, unfortunately. So
Yeah, it is unfortunate because I mean, yeah, I acknowledge that it is problematic indeed, but yeah, at least there's something to show for it, good and
yeah,
bad. But with
and
lawns, like, yeah, this is nothing.
and the problem is going to increase because we're losing farmland. And the more farmland we use, the more demand we're going to have on the farmland that we still have, which means we're going to increase our fertilizer use to increase with this idea that it's going to increase yield. And plants can only produce so much. You can breed them to produce higher yields, but there reaches a point, sort of like vitamin C. Vitamin C is a water soluble vitamin. So we drink our orange juice in the morning and our body takes up what it needs. And when we go to the bathroom, we expel whatever vitamin C our body didn't need. And the plants are the same way. They're going to take up whatever they can use, and then the rest is just going to be waste. So the fertilizer issue is going to become a bigger issue the more farmland we lose. So
Why do we lose farmland? Losing it to
well,
development?
in my
Oh,
state, the governor increased just residential property. The property tax is about, well, not in the urban environment. Like I live on like a quarter of an acre, and my property taxes are about $1,200. Farmland, the property tax used to be $150 an acre, and it's up to
okay.
$2,000 an acre. It went from
Oh,
150 to
wow.
$2,000 an acre. Now, just say you can just do the math. A small farm, 25 to 50 acres, and it happened with no warning. I mean, it was just bam. It wasn't even done in increments where farmers could prepare. It
Wow.
went from 150 to $2,000 an acre. So what happens is farmers have to sell to pay the
Yeah, and they're
property
forced
tax.
to sell their property so that they can develop these residential areas.
Mhm.
Wow.
Yes.
That's
And
nuts.
and there's a lot of since you are young guys, there's a lot of under the table deals. There's a piece of land that's probably half an acre. It's got 5 natural springs on it. The gentleman that owned it, a woman bought his house and she said, I really don't want anybody living behind me. And he said, there's no way anybody will live behind you because there's 5 natural springs. In the farm we use septic systems, so it has to the water the to build you have to pass a percolation test. We don't
Hmm.
have sewers, but where I live now we have a sewer system. So that property had just been allowed to grow up and be beautiful and everything for at least 50 years, and a developer came in and sweetened the deal and was able to develop, and there's about 18 houses on that property, and they have like what I call half basements. And so the half basement, well, all it does is it holds a sump pump to keep the water away from the homes, and Lord forbid if the power goes out. But it's because they built on a very small piece of property that has 5 natural springs, and everybody's backyard's a drainage ditch. That's just crazy to me. I don't know why somebody would buy a house where I mean, literally, you open the back door and there's a drainage ditch.
Yeah.
Bad planning, bad use of land. But it had never been able to pass for development before, and then all of a sudden If you don't pass the first time, I would assume you're probably not going to pass the 20th time you try. But but that's why we're losing farmland for a couple of reasons. We're losing farmland due to property tax increase. We're losing farmland because farming is not being promoted at the college level as a respectable type of career. It's dirty and it's nasty, and if you can't read and you're ignorant and all this stuff, you're a farmer. So
Yeah.
nobody wants to do that. And hands-on learning generation, they don't want to do that either, because they want to play video games and all that stuff. So these farmers have no one to pass the farm on to.
There's there's a decreasing interest in it.
I mean, people like to eat,
Yeah,
but we don't have the
they
interest.
sure do. They
And
like to eat
so,
Doritos though, not potatoes.
well, you got to have corn for that. But I mean,
Yeah.
it's a complicated situation. And it's not getting any better. We used to have set aside programs for farmland. And that was to try to keep it out of development, and farmers got paid for not growing on that land, just letting it grow up. But those types of programs have dried up, so there aren't a lot of choices for farmers. And small farmers can't grow cattle and make any money, so that's a whole nother issue. So, but
I think we should ask the editors to have like a behind the scenes for our video call, so that people could also hear the second half of this conversation
that's
after
fine.
we concluded.
You
Yeah,
can
because this is
you
good.
can
I think
you
it's
can
good.
submit that to him, and I will say this, and then I'll let you guys go unless you have something else. If you want to help with curriculum, I'm a curriculum writer. That's another job. I'm a Jill of many trades.
Okay.
I've written curriculum for Iowa State on carpentry, and I'm not a carpenter, but I'm a vocational educator. So my class I was talking about, I taught gardening classes through AARP virtually for senior citizens, which was kind of interesting. But I've been in ag teaching people for over 18 years. I've done it through YouTube. I was the brand for an online gardening magazine. I wrote all their blogs and articles, answered the questions, did their videos. So unfortunately, I thought I would retire from that company, and somebody offered the owner some really nice money, and he took it, and they turned it into a cannabis growing site and didn't want to keep me. So, I was, they still make money off the YouTube channel I created, but so if you all need any help, just reach out to me, or if you have any questions, because ag and arboriculture's, we have some of the same issues, and I could speak for hours about urbanization. Part of my master's is in urban planning and environmental education. And when I wrote my thesis 3 times and then ended up not needing it. And I so did not want to write a thesis on this topic, but they talked me into writing my thesis on CAFOs and Tyson in particular, because in Kentucky, there's a really bad situation, and CAFOs go in and they rip the farmer off, and they create these huge manure piles on drainage ditches, and it's just a mess. But unfortunately, Tyson's got a lot of money, and they just pack up their toys and go somewhere else. And so I've been all over the place. I do all sorts of stuff. So and I like it.
Yeah, I have that in my notes too. It is something that and then too, when we have other time, we can tell you sort of where some of our ideas are taking us now. To, I guess, just see if it makes sense. And also too, like I'm genuinely not just like plugging our articles just, to get more viewership. But if you didn't mind, if you looked through our catalog, you'd see that a lot of the things that we've written about so far, they're not really in any linear progression. It's sort of like whatever I'm inspired to write about. And so like they're kind of all over the place. I think only after reading a lot of it do people get a sense of the full picture. But I've had a hard time historically zooming out far enough to actually make some sort of like linear way to communicate
All these
all
ideas.
these ideas. Because also too, in my own experience of having the ideas, hasn't been linear either. You know,
Right,
it's
right.
never a straight line. It's always like zigging and zagging and going back and forth. So I do think like a curriculum would probably like not only help educate others on it, but it also might help just like me
Yeah, yeah.
understand this whole thing that's happening.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll look at it and I'll reach out to you all and tell you what I think.
Thank
But
you.
I think, um, you're gonna have to kind of ponder, who is your demographic. I work with
Mhm.
several businesses and they want to market to everybody, and that's great. When I wrote my first book, I wanted everybody to read it, but it doesn't work that way, unfortunately. And it sounds like your all's holistic approach is the younger generation, not the older generation.
I
um,
think so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I'm the older generation, but I've always been this way. My dad worked for the Board of Health, and my dad, I trusted my dad. If my dad told me to do something, I would go and do it. And we had this particular year, we were having drought conditions, and we had these little pockets of water in our creek, and we had a mosquito problem. And my dad, this speaks of my age, but my dad had DDT tablets, so he sent me back to the creek. And I guess he never read Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, but
Hmm.
so I did what my dad told me to do, and not thinking, I took my horse down to drink, and he
Oh
drank.
no.
And that summer he developed throat cancer and had to be put down. And ever since then, I've got really bad allergies. So I'm like the swimmer allergic to chlorine and bromine. I'm the Aggie allergic to pollen, that
Uh,
kind of thing. So I've always, after that experience, have always been very careful anytime I used any type of chemical. And I choose not to. Um, I use red balls and paint them with a sticky substance to capture insects so they don't lay eggs in the apple trees. Um, versus spraying.
yeah,
Because I don't live there. I'd have to go over there every time we had a rain, reapply. With my approach, I don't have to do that. And they think it's an apple, and they fly in and they lay their eggs, and they never get out of the sticky stuff.
that's awesome.
So but not everybody's that way. But I'm in that generation that you just spray something and you end it, and you go on with your life. But I don't follow that type of practice. So there aren't, I'm not a flower child, but I was around, um, that type of era. But I think your younger generation would be the ones that would really grab a hold of this and run with it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, we think so too.
so
Awesome. Yeah, well this has been
Yeah.
awesome, Mindy. Yeah, like super cool to meet you, and thank you for like, just doing everything you're doing, not just the podcast stuff, but yeah, thanks for just being a thoughtful person in the
well,
right place.
I have this philosophy, and then I'll let you all go because I know you're very busy and we could speak for hours on this. But I do have a philosophy. I'm a grandmother now, and I just want to leave the world a little better for my children. And I'm just one person, but
Yeah,
I don't ride on my laurels and just say I'm one person. I can't make a difference and forget about it. Um, but I have personally seen some crazy stuff that just makes me go, you know, that affects everybody. And unfortunately, I was invited to the University of Glasgow last July to do a presentation on my books, and had never been to a foreign country. I've been to Canada numerous times. That's not a foreign country to me. Never
right.
flew, never went to a foreign country, never been to that university, been to several universities to do a presentation to a group of people I didn't know. And I was amazed at how clean that country was. I mean, most people would be like, you know, the scenery and all this. I was amazed because the Ohio River runs between Kentucky and Indiana, and that river is dirty, and there's trash, and there's dead bodies and a bunch of stuff. But we were staying off the River Clyde, and it was so clean. They had ring buoys like every 10 feet hanging off this simple wooden fence. In case somebody fell in, you could just throw the ring buoy. I mean, no cigarette butts on the ground in the
Yeah.
city. It was crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They had recycling bins. You see, I'm getting excited about this. They had recycling bins in the city. And I took my recycling down to the recycling center yesterday, which that's another. But anyway, but there were no bags of trash sitting by the recycling bin. People were actually walking up and sorting the recyclables in the bin. It was a miracle. We're talking Glasgow, Edinburgh, you know, big cities, and people were doing that. I was just so amazed. I mean, my husband's taking pictures of, the double decker buses and all that stuff. And
Yeah.
I'm amazed at the
You're looking
recycling
at trash
bin.
cans.
Yeah. I mean, I was just I was like looking on the ground going, where are the cigarette butts? They had outdoor seating at the restaurants, and you didn't have trash everywhere like in Lowell. And it was like, why is there such a difference? And a gentleman where we stayed at, he said that's what happens when you came to a country that has one mind, and they have a goal of meeting the ESG. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but it's
Standard,
like a ESG. It's like a 12-point
environmental standard
guideline.
I think it's environmental, sustainable, governmental, and it's where companies can qualify through the UN of being labeled a sustainable business. And so Scotland, well, Britain, Scotland, that whole part of the world, is they have this goal of meeting all these standards by like 2035 or something. And some of those standards are like hiring minorities, reducing your carbon footprint. But the UN produced this document. But anyway, this gentleman was telling me we have one mindset here. In North America, we have all sorts of mindsets, and everybody thinks they have these rights and et cetera.
Yeah.
That it was crazy different. My husband was like, I can't believe you're just in awe about that recycling bin. But I mean, I was just so amazed at how simple it was and how clean it was. And hopefully North America will have, take some lessons from foreign countries and start having that one mindset where we, realize what I do affects you and what you do affects me. And
well, in an election year, that's probably the least likely to happen.
Yeah, totally
we're probably
agree.
we're moving further away from that right now. It
right.
seems like.
I totally, but we can hope, right? We can hope and do our individual part. And so I had positive vibes when I came back, because I thought, there is a different way of doing this. We don't have to. I mean, that whole country was just amazing to me. I mean, free healthcare, free schooling, free. I mean, it was just crazy. And I was just like, wow, and this country is supposed to be backward. I was like, it was just a really eye-opening experience too, a different way of thinking. But yeah, well, I'm going to let you guys go. I'll look over your articles, and you can I guess you would contact Mark about adding this other stuff if you choose to. And then we'll just go from there.
Awesome.
Thank you, Mindy.
No problem. Talk to you later.
See ya.
Bye. Have a good day.